Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, Deb Kelly. I'm so glad we managed to pull this off. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak with you, Elizabeth.
Well, good. As I said in the intro, you're calling from a cafe because the Wi-Fi in your hotel room and because you're at a conference and all that good stuff. So yeah. I'm glad we were able to squeeze in a little time. Before I get started on talking about your very interesting life and what you're doing, if you were, who would be your dream interview? If you were going to interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Okay, so I did think about this. I would interview the great Rosalind Franklin. And if you're a scientist, you know who that is. It's the woman who's credited for discovering that DNA is actually in the shape of a double helix.
A double helix, okay.
A double helix. And so I would ask her what that moment of discovery is like when she first had the realization of the architecture that gives life to all human existence. She has the first snapshot to view how our genetic code is arranged. And then you can start to infer how cells are arranged, how molecules are made in the body. It's the true first moment of discovery in life sciences in the 20th century that gave rise to everything in the entire biomedical research industry today.
Wow.
I would just want to know what that first moment of discovery is like when she first realized, oh, it's a helix.
Yeah.
Like I'm a microscopist, so I look at things and
so a microscopist.
Yeah, I use microscopes.
You use microscopes. So you're a microscope geek, expert.
I'm a microscope geek. So I look at things using high-powered microscopes to see down to the level of precise atoms.
Oh.
And so being someone who's very visual and looking at things for the first time that no one else has ever seen, for me, I get this rush of discovery when I see these things. And so I just wanted to know what it was like when she first discovered that. Like that moment of discovery, like, wow, it really is that. Like, it's fascinating to me. That moment of discovery is why many of us do science, because we want to discover something, or we want to see something differently, or we want to be able to understand things that give rise to disease or cause complications like SARS-CoV-2. Imagine if we didn't have those first images of what that virus looked like. How would we be able to combat it to help make the world a better place? So that first true moment of discovery, it's good to see how other scientists react to that.
I'm curious. So you've been through this. You've got a bunch of patents and you've got a bunch of discoveries that you're credited for. Do you think it was a perfect aha moment, or do you think she thought, that's interesting, and looked again and thought, that's interesting, and it sort of finally crystallized in her brain, and she said, I wonder if I could prove this, and then looked for a helix, a double helix?
Yeah, I like how you used the term crystallized, because she determined that it was a helix by growing crystals of the DNA. Once you get large enough crystals of the DNA, then you can shoot X-rays through it. And then it makes different patterns that give rise to the mathematical properties to infer that it's a helix. So it's interesting, your term there is so spot on without you realizing it. So, at first, for me, you get those, that's interesting. Wait, what does that mean? But then you get the spark of, wait, I'm seeing this and no one else has ever seen this. It's like you have the first snapshot of a natural secret in the world. And then you want to share it by doing lots of experiments to follow up and seeing what these things mean, And it's good to doubt yourself at first. And I like for my students to come with me to their ideas and we discuss and we're like, what if it means this? What if it means that? And then I doubt them and myself until I can prove myself right or wrong. So as to avoid confirmation bias. And then we go back and we can try to follow up and read what others have done. But if you read too much up front, then you might bias yourself into thinking to prove your ideas right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's good to doubt yourself and then try and have to prove yourself evidentiarily. And when you have enough evidence, then you start to write up your results and then you publish them. And then you share them with the community, and then others can publish and add on or refute. That's the nature of publishing in academics. And our main job as professors, I feel like, are to mentor and raise the next generation of scientists and also pay them to do the work. So what we do is we write a lot of grants. In order to get the grants, we publish a lot of papers. And the scientific process of discovery, though, is what drives me. Seeing something no one has ever seen before and trying to
that's what keeps you
understand
coming
it.
back. Yeah.
It's that moment of discovery. We're like, wow, looks like that. No one else has ever seen this. And then you're fascinated by it. You have to just know more and more, driven by that natural curiosity. And that curiosity is what keeps you going, because a lot of times, most of what you do in science, your experiments don't work. And then you have to find a way to make them work. You have to troubleshoot, and the learned ability to troubleshoot and go back and learn, what does this result mean? What does that result mean? A lot of times when you get a negative result, it's not what you expect. You might be sad, but it's really interesting. You're like, well, what does it mean if it's not this? And that's actually cool moments in science too. It's trying to understand, put all the pieces of data together to build a story of what you're looking at.
I keep thinking about, I've often thought about that famous Isaac Asimov quote where he said, most discoveries don't come with a aha, eureka. It comes with a
That's weird. What does that mean?
Yeah.
That's weird. What does that mean?
Yes.
Yeah, but
for our non-English speaking listeners, Isaac Asimov was a very famous scientist and science fiction author in the 1950s and 60s. So wrote some of the seminal works of science fiction. And since I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, I love that phrase. So Deb, I'm curious. You are well established, senior tenured professor now, and you are a name in the field of medical science, microscopic. Said I probably can't pronounce it all, but what was it like as a woman, as a scientist? How did you get into a field that doesn't usually have women?
Yeah, when I started in my PhD, there weren't a lot of senior women to look up to. There were a handful, and I thought they were really amazing scientists. Some are still working in the field today. I was really drawn to the work of my PhD advisor. I thought he was doing a lot of groundbreaking science. And when I interviewed for graduate school, I really wanted to join his team and learn from him. He's a very eminent scholar in microscopy. And when I joined his team, I just couldn't imagine doing anything else. It really sparked me into wanting to do microscopy for the rest of my life and understand how molecules look and act, and then take that into how they're different in disease and what we can do to understand those processes differently. So seeing few female role models, I had been an undergraduate major in chemistry, and then my PhD is in molecular biophysics. I was used to not seeing a lot of female role models, to be honest with you. But having strong male role models is also important. Not all women are going to advocate for other women in the workplace and in the field, and not all men are against women in the workplace and the field. And you just have to find those individual champions who will stick by you and help mentor you and support you. So being in a male-dominated field, I didn't start to realize there were difficulties until after my graduate school and into my further training, let's just say in career development. I never had difficulties in my PhD. I did have some difficulties uh, in the work I was doing during my postdoc because it's a very demanding field, and I was in a very demanding environment. And that's when I started to see a lot of different things in academics and the true side of academics. And, you know, everyone struggles, male and female, to make it through the academic ladder. I'm not the only one who's faced struggles, but what one only sees on a CV is the successes. Like for every
on the resume and
on the
CV.
resume,
Yes, right.
for every award you get or an accomplishment, there's 10 things you don't get properly. And so to see lots of highlights means there are lots of things that didn't work out along the path. I don't know anyone that everything works out the first time, particularly in science with experiments, etc. So being in a male-dominated field, I was kind of used to that.
Okay.
Coming through the academic ranks, so it wasn't unusual to me. Until my current position, I was the first senior tenured female in the entire department in the history of Penn State. And I found that a bit striking and odd, but it is kind of a young department. But it was really an honor to take on that role and be a role model as such. And in my current position, and roles through the Microscopy Society of America, I rose to the ranks of first
Microscopy Society
of America.
Okay.
It's the national organization for all things related to microscopes and academic science related to microscopes.
And I'm guessing that microscopes that you work with don't look like the standard picture of the tube and the slide on it that you move the dials.
Some of them do, and some of them look like a plain 20-foot tall box full of electronics, the size of a city bus.
Oh,
just standing up vertically in a room.
Okay.
And you're in a command center off-site using this high-powered microscope that can see down to the level of atoms. So we use everything from the two ones that you used in high school, or you know,
I certainly use them in high school. Yes,
that you can imagine, like what the emoji looks like on your phone for microscope, all the way to something that looks like a city bus turned on its side that's vertical in the air and 20-foot tall.
Oh, wow.
So it runs a gamut. And so the society that I was elected to be president of runs a gamut from the emoji to the city bus, essentially. And it was in that role where I started to see a lot of the good and the bad in the field. People in the field are wonderful. And then you have a small fraction, just like any population, who aren't. But that was also parallel in what I was seeing in academics. A lot of people are wonderful. It's almost like a Gaussian curve distribution. That means like the majority of people are in the middle, and then there are fringes on both sides. Some are highly great and some are not so great. And so you just have to learn to be yourself, believe in yourself, stand up for yourself, and fight every day to
fight every day.
Be your best, and fight every day.
Yes.
To be your best.
Well, and to keep the funding, because I know I have scientists in my family, so I've heard lots of these stories. To fight for the funding. I'm curious, you work on, you've said that you're looking to find a rapid test for cancer, and it was breast cancer that got you into the field in the first place. Tell us that story. What was it that got you interested in breast cancer and figuring out what the atoms were doing?
That's a great question. So when I say I want to make a rapid test for cancer, it means I want to advance technology such that, like we had done for COVID, everyone had done the nasal swab, and that's easy to get at because that's where the specimen would be available, and then you test at home. we had done some work in that space, and I was also doing cancer research. So I was thinking, why isn't there a rapid test for cancer? Could it be something similar to like a pregnancy test that you could do at home, or a rapid test you could do for COVID? And it's still in the sort of formulation stages. We're far from having that, but shouldn't we have such big grand goals at trying to understand clinical diagnosis where you can do something at home for preventative medicine and trying to personalize the way in which you can take your healthcare into your own hands? I think that would be a great goal. So how do we get there? If this is your grand goal, like let's say that was one of my goals, how do I get there? You did a lot of research to get there. And my breast cancer interest was sparked when I was first interviewing for my job, my first faculty position at Virginia Tech. And my grandmother, who was a breast cancer survivor, passed away during my job interview. And I'm originally from Virginia. So I thought, oh, it would be nice to be closer to my family in my first faculty position, should I need to go home or deal with anything. So I accepted the job at Virginia Tech. It was an outstanding director, outstanding facilities. Virginia Tech is a wonderful place. And I had a great career there. And like 5 years ago, moved to Penn State, and that's been wonderful too.
And that's Penn State. That's the Pennsylvania State University. Right. Okay.
Right.
For our non-English, non-US listeners. Right.
Right. Of course. And so at Virginia Tech, I was working on some scientific experiments. And as part of that, we had this aha moment where we were able to identify a breast cancer related gene product in some of our experimental preparations. And so I had the idea that seems really important. We should start to work on that if we're able to get at these proteins and answer some questions related to why it's different in individuals who are more susceptible to breast cancer than other individuals. And I was looking through a public database of many different mutations, genetic mutations, meaning things that are changed in people's genes who have breast cancer versus those who don't have breast cancer. And the information of where some of those mutations or errors in the genetic code were apparent. And I realized we're doing a lot of screens for genes and we can know where these problems are, but then what do we do about it once we know what the problems are? How would you fix it? How would you understand how the problem really translates to issues that give rise to disease? So in order to look at the problem and dream about even fixing it, you have to kind of look at it. And to look at problems with proteins, you need to use high-powered microscopes. So one of my research missions was to start to look at and use microscopes to look at these problems giving rise to these genetic mutations in breast cancer. And that led to the launch of our entire research program related to breast cancer, and now into pancreatic cancer and brain tumor research, the types of cancers that are highly intractable to treat, but are also the most deadly and cause the most issues in the body. So you have to work on hard things that are important, I always say. And so if we could even make some progress at understanding how these proteins and problems in the genetic code look and operate to give rise to disease, that's new information no one's ever seen before because we had a visual component to it. So that's kind of how it all sort of started in my lab space. And I had a wonderful team, I had the right support, I had a wonderful administrative unit, and like I said, a wonderful executive director who supported me. And we were able to get funding to do the projects, which makes universities very happy as well as me. And it just started the entire cancer program that I was working on.
Okay. So Deb, this is really interesting, all the things that you're doing, and you're making a huge difference in the world. How have things changed in the time that you've been, since you first maybe you first walked into a science class when you were 12 or something and said, ooh, this is cool. How have things changed for those of us who are not in the majority, you know, not the straight white men, was always one's idea of a scientist?
Right, that's an excellent question. And a colleague of mine who's very shrewd always says representation matters. And for younger people or younger women to see someone like myself with the LGBTQIA background, that is changing. There are still very few of us in the field, but it is changing. I don't know if people are just more comfortable expressing their identities today or not, compared to the demographic of older Caucasian gentlemen. When I was growing up, my field is still dominated by that demographic, let's say. But when we think about looking back on the day of Rosalind Franklin, she was faced with the same demographic, and it still exists today in my field, where it's heavily male dominated in STEM. And whether that demographic has changed or not, some of the attitudes of these people have changed quite a bit. I've seen throughout, from my PhD to now. There's still a lot of misogyny, and misogyny can be expressed by people who identify as male or people who identify as female. That doesn't go away. It's just a complex factor in society that is always a struggle for everyone. Men have to deal with other men who are misogynist. Women have to deal with other women who are misogynist. It's unfortunate. But I see a shift in the way people are more comfortable expressing themselves in terms of their identity and standing up for themselves in terms of their identity. And whether those demographics have changed or not, some of the attitudes have improved to be more accepting and belonging in the academic workspace.
Well, you said something about when Rosalind Franklin discovered the double helix model of DNA, somebody else got the Nobel Prize for it.
Right. She had passed, and colleagues Watson and Crick were awarded the Nobel Prize for the discovery.
Watson and Crick. Okay.
Yeah. James Watson and Francis Crick were credited for the discovery of the double helix. She had obtained the original data and the data gave rise to the theory of there being that form of DNA existing in cells. So I think the consensus in the scientific arena is that she actually discovered it, but could not receive the credit for it because the Nobel Prize isn't awarded to those who have passed. It's a prize to individuals who are alive.
Oh, so maybe she would have gotten the Nobel Prize if she'd still been alive.
Everyone speculates as though she would have, as do I.
I'm curious.
So it's thought that she would have.
Okay,
sure.
Just a quick question. If I don't know if there's a quick answer to this, but why does knowing the model that it looks like a double helix, why does that matter? Why do we care?
Why is it important that we care about that? It gives all insights to how our entire genetic code is arranged. And that gives insights to how everything in biology functions. The way in which your arms are placed in your body, the way in which your hair falls, the way in which you look, all of those, they're called phenotypes, which is just an expression of how things look and where places go. To give rise to the body is based on how that DNA code is arranged. And that DNA code, when it's replicated or copied to give rise to new cells, has to open up and breathe. Then genes have to be activated to give rise to all the functions in the cells. So it really was the cryptic message of how cells are made, how molecules are made. It gave rise to the entire dogma of molecular biology, which wasn't even called molecular biology at the time. It was called maybe genetics or something to that effect. But the term molecular biology means how all of biology works down at the molecular nitty-gritty scale of things. So
because now you can see the molecules.
now you can see the molecules. Now you can understand how genes are arranged. Now you can understand how genes work and operate to give rise to every molecule in your body.
So would it be fair to say that if you know the way it normally looks, then when something is not in that pattern,
Right. That's an excellent way of saying it.
Wait, something's wrong here. Let's figure out what's going on.
Right, like the mutations that give rise to breast cancer or other diseases. Cancer is a genetic disease. A lot of people don't realize that. But that means if there's a problem in how the DNA is arranged, or there are injuries in DNA itself. DNA can get injured just like if you cut yourself, you need to put a Band-Aid on it. How do we come up with those molecular Band-Aids that will heal the genetic code? And can things go back to being in a healed way if you do have a disease? It just gives rise to all of our fundamental knowledge of how cells are made and how we exist. It was one of the most fundamental discoveries.
You could ultimately extrapolate that into problem and solution in terms of this will get the DNA back into the double helix where it's happiest.
Yeah, the right way in which it has to be arranged to properly function, has to open up to turn things on and off in the body. We always say in our field that structure equals function. So the way something is arranged dictates how it's going to work. That's also a central dogma in the scientific field of biology. So it was one of the most fundamental discoveries in the century for life sciences.
Wow.
And can you imagine, you're the female scientist who's sitting there on that discovery, trying to convince yourself, is it really what I think it is or not? Is it? And then you do have a eureka moment, and then you share it, and then others try and claim credit for it. Yes. That still happens in academia too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That hasn't changed.
Yes.
That has not changed. And if someone doesn't agree with you, they can just, complain all day about it and try and drive you down. And things like that happen in academia too. It's actually a very cutthroat industry. You wouldn't believe it. You would think that we're all together trying to make discoveries to make the world a better place, or trying to cure medical diseases. It's often not like that. Everyone now has the same tools, and there are so many open questions, and people work on the same questions with the same tools, try and claim that their way of doing something is better than others, which may or may not be the case. And sometimes the loudest voice wins, not the person who's actually accurate or right.
And
that's not cool too.
Which is the same in any group of human beings, actually. So it's a lot of what I help my corporate clients work with. Yeah.
Well, that is one of the most important things in all of academics, is if you can help women who don't have such a voice in academics. So what I would say to the other part of your question is, what would I say to younger women today is stay strong, keep pushing, do not weaken. And that is a direct quote from Grace Burke, who's a senior fellow at Idaho National Laboratory, and someone who I've used as a personal mentor and always looked up to in our field. Also a former president of the same microscope society that I led very recently. She's a wonderful role model. That's a direct quote from her when I was feeling down about a month ago, related to some things going on in my career. And so I took it to heart, and I just keep standing up for myself. And when you get stronger pushback, when you stand up for yourself, you know you're doing something right. Because people don't like when you stand up for yourself. Oftentimes they try to get into some sort of like
power
aggressive
games.
Contest. Yeah, power games. That's the best way to say it. I wouldn't know how to say it otherwise. My life coach says that you're on a team of gladiators, and you just have to have the better gladiators on your team to fight the other gladiators who are just full of it.
Yes.
And power games and power struggles dominate every industry. They dominate academics as well.
Everywhere you go. Yeah.
It's horrible. And you don't learn that as a young professor. You only learn that as you climb through the ranks. As you become more well-known, more gets dumped on you.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what the woman who just won the Nobel Prize for the COVID vaccine discovery, she speaks very openly about all the negative things that have happened in her career. And she followed that phrase by Grace Burke exactly throughout her career. She speaks very openly about it. Stay strong, keep pushing, do not weaken.
Stay strong, keep pushing, do not weaken. I think actually
when Grace said that phrase to me, it just resonated with me. I was like, I will stay strong and not weaken.
I love that. That's a
when
great
I
way
encounter challenges. You might be depressed, you might be sad about it. It's so hard to do. It's easy to just say those words. It's so hard to do and believe in yourself enough to do it. It's absolutely difficult. You have to have the right people on your side. I have a wonderful department head in my department in biomedical engineering. I have a wonderful dean. She's amazing. I can't imagine the struggle she has been through to rise through the ranks to get at her professional accomplishments, as well as my department head. But everyone has their own struggles. It's particularly difficult for minorities in academics, be it whatever your heritage or background is. I don't like to say skin color. I would like to just refer to people's heritage who may not be presenting as Caucasian males, let's say. But it's not that they haven't had to struggle as well.
Yeah.
Everything's a struggle. It's just
there's always a reason to look down on someone else. So Deb Kelly,
and those are just people who are you don't want to be around. You just want to not be around them or stand up for yourself. And it's really hard to do. So sorry, I'm getting off of it here.
You're going off my head, and we're out of time. Which I could listen to you for hours, but I know that you have to go back to your conference. They're waiting for you. So let's end.
Thank you so much.
This phrase: stay strong, keep pushing, do not weaken. I love that. I love that.
I love it too. Thank you, Grace Burke, for bringing those elegant words into my life.
So Deb Kelly, thank you so much for having been a guest. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to hear more, please subscribe to us, whatever app you're listening to, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tell your friends. This has been Elizabeth Bachman, and I will see you on the next one.